Good evening. Clearly, we're in the evening portion of the event. We've sent the small children home. We're covering some topics that are a little more risque, sexy, certainly controversial. My topic checks all those boxes, and on top of that, it just may shake you to your core. Do I have your consent to proceed? Are you okay accepting that level of risk? Yes? I like this crowd. All right. So, I'm going to be speaking with you about a very exciting topic called risk management. Woohoo! I've got to figure out a way to make that interesting and consequential to you. But the reality is, you're probably asking, why is this guy so excited about risk management? Frankly, it's because for 25 years, I've been working with businesses to apply certain techniques to optimize risk so that they can maximize profits while avoiding going out of business or damaging their reputations. But my real excitement on the topic is because when I look around, I see that society does not manage risk very well. I think the past 2 years in particular have been eye-opening for that reason. But I'm more passionate about the topic because I see an opportunity to improve and to fix some of these ills for society. I mean, come on, look at these people. Do they look like they manage risk well? Are they making smart, informed decisions? I think COVID has made this worse. Fortunately, I know firsthand that the techniques that I use from a business perspective are also very helpful for a personal perspective. I'm going to walk you through some of those specific techniques and start with basically my risk origin story. So most people would look at this glass and they probably grew up listening to their parents say, is that glass half empty or half full? In my house, it was a little bit different. My mom was typically screaming, whose glass is that? Why is it on the edge of the table? Somebody's going to run into the glass or the dog's tails are going to knock it over. That's my mom voice, so sorry, Mom, if you're watching this. But obviously, I grew up with a keen perception of risk, and I always felt like I had to reduce risk levels as much as I could. I invested my allowance in savings bonds, if you're familiar with what those are. I'm a CPA. I got a degree in accounting. You probably get the picture. But as a young adult, I was working internationally, and I had an eye-opening experience that frankly shook me to my core. I almost died, or at least I was in a situation where I could have died, and it totally reoriented my perceptions on risk. I realized that there are too many opportunities in life to go on always worried about what could happen. Need to make better decisions. 3 days later, I saw the most beautiful woman I had ever seen before, and I guess I can use this expression after your presentation. I had the balls to go up and talk to her. And the reality is, she gave me a chance, and she's now my wife of 16 years, and we've got 2 great children. And yes, children are high risk as well, but certainly high reward. Because of her support and some research I did a few years after that, I started my own business. And if you think that you get cold feet when you're getting married, you ought to open up a business. Harris had presented something on this earlier this evening, but basically you're going from an income and a job to no guarantees. So it's high risk, but again, I did the research, I applied some of those techniques, and the business has been a huge success. I truly feel like I'm living my best life, and it's only because of that better risk assessment and some of those techniques that I used in my business career, applying them to my personal life. Unfortunately, most people today really don't deal with risk well, and they don't realize that smart, calculated risks can lead you to your best life. They either don't seek out data to make informed decisions, or they trust sources that they obviously shouldn't. Their consideration of the odds is nearly non-existent. There's no consideration of how likely it is that this bad thing might happen, and if it does happen, how bad could that actually be? Am I going to die from it? Or am I just going to, be embarrassed for a little bit? And the default decision for way too many people is to feel like they can simply avoid risk. And then as a result, they don't realize the unintended consequences of that and the opportunities that they miss out on. Because of all this, they also usually have a bad perception of other people who take different types of risks than them. Might consider them stupid or dumb or naive or gross. So how should we all deal with risk? I guess the good or the bad thing is that we're born with risk hardwired in our DNA. You know, if you're out and you're walking across the field, you know, and you're looking for something to eat or drink, if you hear a rustling in the bushes, you know I probably have to get running. And the reason for that is if you don't, it could be a tiger. And if it's a tiger, you're dead, right? It's better to be a little hungry than a lot dead. Similarly, because of, I think, our inherent desire to try and find things to be scared of, fears to have, risks to avoid, I think COVID has replaced the tigers and the lions that were roaming the streets. What's really interesting about COVID is that it also highlights another disgusting, hardwired DNA, evolutionary biology instinct we have, and that's to avoid things that are gross because of disgust. Now, I have no idea what this thing is. I don't know if any of you do. I'd almost be concerned if you did know what it was. But instinctively, you know to avoid it, right? That level of disgust may keep you alive. All right, so how exactly, again, do businesses assess risk? First, they get data and they do the math. I know you all hate math, but the reality is we are going to use a little bit of that this evening. There's a lot of information available out there. You know, usually it's information overload, and we make thousands of decisions each day which are going to be influenced by that evolutionary biology, our experiences, and the information that we've digested over the years. So find the right data and information sources you can trust. Easier said than done, right? Do you see anything interesting or noticeable in this ad that I simply clipped from my news feed? Anything jump out at you? My son hasn't said anything, and I'll tell you why that's relevant in a second. What's really scary is that a Stanford University study of almost 8,000 young people, in that study they found that 82% of middle schoolers could not identify or differentiate a sponsored ad or media advertisement from a real news story. That's when a source is being transparent about its actual motives and intent. Imagine all the sources that aren't. So who do you trust? Politicians? Business leaders? Mainstream media? Conservative or liberal outlets? Twitter? Instagram? TikTok? All right, don't get me started on my 13-year-old, because I swear half of what he knows or brings up to me nowadays is stuff that he learned on TikTok. Although he's very smart, and when I ask, he says he actually learned it from Inside Edition. Why that's somehow more credible, I have no idea, but in his mind, he believes it is. So you need to have a little mistrust, a little cynicism about all those sources, because, at the end of the day, they all have agendas you need to be aware of. Simply mentioning this, I know I've waded a little bit into politics, but since everything is political nowadays, let's jump a little further. Sometimes our sources give us a distorted view of reality, or certainly shape our perception of risk. That frankly really matters. A survey by Rasmussen Reports, released in 2021, showed that different groups, based on the information that they watched, had totally different perceptions around the risk from COVID. Specifically, 28% of Democrats thought that more than 10% of the people who were diagnosed with COVID died from COVID. However, the reality at the time was that only 1.6% of people diagnosed with COVID died from it. That means that those people were overestimating the impact from COVID by 5 times the actual rate. Similar studies show that perceptions on the right look at the crime from immigration or immigrants, and they're equally flawed. So this goes both ways. So what's the relevance to this? Might this have had some impact on the decisions about masks or vaccines, how we perceive others, who don't have the same risk perceptions? Just as a test, did that freak anybody out? I think we've all changed a little bit during COVID. We're very keenly aware of who's coughing and what they might be spreading. So the other reality is that it put a lot of governments in the position where they tried to enforce one-size-fits-all strategies on the population, which again is very difficult when you've got different risk levels and perceptions about risk. Listen, I'm not trying to tell you what to watch or what you should read. I'm only suggesting how you watch it. Avoid the echo chamber. Don't just listen to one source, one side of the political aisle, one political party. Acknowledge your confirmation bias. You'd be surprised. People naturally will seek out sources of information that they think are going to confirm what they want to do or what they already believe. Also recognize that everybody's got motives, everybody has intentions. You have to ask yourself, is there something this person's trying to sell me? Are they trying to get me on board with a certain political party? What's their agenda? Look for sources that are transparent about that agenda and are willing to disclaim editorial content from actual news. And look for those sources willing to defend or debate their ideas. If you're not willing to defend your point of view and you just want to shut down anybody who disagrees, that's not very inspiring or showing a lot of confidence in those beliefs. All right, keeping all that in mind, we have to apply a framework for assessing risk. It is going to apply math, so help me with some calculations. We'll try and make this as high level as possible. So this is a matrix we use in a business setting. You're already snoring. If I hear snores, I understand. But basically, we use this type of a matrix that looks at data and information coming in and the calculations that we do considering both the impact and the likelihood from the activity. So for COVID, as an example, the impact might be you don't even realize you have COVID to you die alone, depressed, hopeless in a hospital. From a likelihood perspective, that can range from the risk of that type of event can range from very unlikely to very likely. Hopefully that makes sense. We'll use the example in a more tangible, if not crazy, example of taking a swim in the ocean. Most people don't want to get attacked by a shark. Of course, there could be a strong current, jellyfish, there could be any number of lurking disasters in the ocean we all tend to be afraid of, but let's focus on sharks for now. Before I get started, has anybody here ever been attacked by a shark? Thank God, because that could have clearly screwed up my math. The impact part of the calculation is easy, right? That's this portion here. Impact from shark attack, bad, right? Whether you're dead, you're maimed, you lose a limb, you're traumatized for the rest of your life, all the impacts from that are really severe. The likelihood is a little more complicated, and we're going to need a little bit of data for that. In 2021, there was a total of 73 shark attacks worldwide. However, I'm skeptical of that number because that was a COVID year, and we all know that less people took vacations, less people were in the water. See how I'm skeptical about the data and how you should be applying that? The other thing I'm kind of skeptical about is, or not skeptical, but rather confused, is the article differentiated unprovoked shark attacks from provoked shark attacks, and I'm wondering, who in the hell provokes a shark attack? Nonetheless, let's move forward with that data. Okay, so this is a breakdown of unprovoked shark attacks by country. For whatever reason, sharks love Americans or hate Americans, depending on how you look at this. Nonetheless, that's the most recent data we have. So ultimately, we need to make a decision. So I still have to figure out or estimate how many people went into the ocean worldwide in order to do those calculations. For the sake of simple math, let's assume 73 million people got into the oceans in 2021. We already said before that only 73 were attacked. So basically, you have a 1 in a million chance of getting attacked by a shark. That puts us over here on that same matrix. And when you combine them, you move this one and this one, severe impact, unlikely to happen, combines for a overall medium risk level. I like those odds. And quite frankly, even if I don't, I could choose to go to the beaches in Spain. You'll notice that Spain was not on that list of countries with shark attacks, And I'm not aware of any shark attacks here, at least, mainland Spain in quite some time. So is it worth the risk? For me, yes, but I'm potentially more high risk than a lot of people. Now, back to my own example with my own life. When I met my wife, my likelihood of rejection was very likely. And if you remember the picture of her, don't act like you weren't already thinking that. From an impact perspective, though, because of my awakening, I was willing to take the risk because I move on from it. Frankly, I wish a lot of the kids would have the same perceptions around mistakes on social media or other sorts of decisions that they make that have consequences. Whatever the case, I was willing to take the risk, and similar to the shark attack, that puts me in the medium category, which were probably about my same odds in convincing that hot lady to give me a chance. 1 in a million, if you'll remember from the shark attack. One last point here. Recognize that the lens through which you perceive risk is impacted by your prior experiences, your evolutionary biology, and again, what you think you already want. So what do you do with the calculations we just did? You've got several choices with regards to risk. You can accept the risk, mitigate it, transfer it, or avoid it. When you do have the options, you certainly can accept the risk. In other words, you do nothing about it. You just go forward with whatever you were planning. You accept the risk levels without any adjustment. But remember, you haven't reduced the risk at all. That can be as simple as answering a question from my wife, what do you think about these pants? And actually answering honestly. Same deal. I haven't mitigated the risk. Option 2, you can mitigate the risk or reduce it. Take steps to decrease the likelihood of it actually happening, or take steps to decrease the impact if it does. With COVID, for example, reduce the likelihood of infection by wearing a mask or an appropriate mask when you feel exposed. Or from an impact perspective, lose some weight if you're obese. Make choices with your physical health. But again, be sure to use trusted sources and follow those sources appropriately. Another option, which is a little less common, but you can transfer the risk, such as buying insurance or having somebody, hopefully willingly, accept the risk on your behalf. But you often don't have a lot of these choices. As an example, when we chose to have kids, we found a gracious couple that promised us that if we couldn't afford the kids or if we couldn't stand the kids, they'd be willing to take the kids from us. Just joking, kids. The policy just covered if we couldn't afford you. And of course, we have option 4, where we simply avoid the risk. Again, it's in our DNA to do this, and we know that if we don't get in the ocean, we can't get attacked by a shark, right? And if we just lock people in their homes for a couple of years due to COVID, nobody will get COVID, right? What could possibly have gone wrong with that plan? Lots, actually. The key issue you have to understand about avoiding risk is that if you don't take risks, you often miss out on opportunities. You also risk unintended consequences, which is a really important concept. So you have to decide which risks are you willing to accept or which opportunities are you willing to forego. Generally, you don't have it both ways, or can have it both ways. In the case of COVID, the lockdowns and panic porn led to stress, anxiety, depression, suicides, particularly in our kids, not to mention the impact on their educations. Adults make bad decisions all the time for a lot of the reasons we just discussed. So do kids. Kids do a lot of stupid things, but they often learn from those mistakes and make better decisions as adults or in the future. In summary, make sure you both collect good information from reliable sources, that you recognize your own risk lens, and that you consider risk magnitude and likelihood actually using math. Choose the right option, and then be aware of your choices and the unintended consequences of whatever you do decide. And remember, great outcomes often come with great costs and frequently higher risks. Let's end on a positive note. I don't want to claim that I have all the answers or that I've lived the perfect life. I've made a lot of mistakes and I've lost in many of those risk calculations. But I really feel blessed because I knew how to take the appropriate risks, the calculated risks that could give me the greatest outcome and allow me to seize the right opportunities. I've been able to do that because I genuinely consider risk magnitude and risk likelihood in making decisions. And I've been able to avoid a lot of the BS that's out there in the form of bad information. And I've been able to mitigate the risks of failure when I've had to. And I have genuine sympathy for people that may have a different risk lens than me. And I think being more understanding of our neighbors, whatever it is, how they want to deal with COVID, how they deal with shark attacks and going to the beach, whatever, I think we need to have sympathy for them, understanding that they see things differently. My kids would tell you that I'm guilty of the same sensitivity to risk as my mom when it comes to wine glasses on the edge of tables. But at least I now can enjoy the wine, or driving around on a motorbike, or doing CrossFit classes as I approach 50 and my body's breaking down. At the end of the day, or speaking to audiences like yourselves, very polite audiences, but you could have attacked me throughout my presentation for various reasons. I might not have made all these choices without that risk lens and the experience that I've carried over from my business and the awakening that I had so many years ago. I wish you all the same awakening and a fulfilling, risk-filled life. Thank you.